My name is Cassie Marlowe, and I'm 29 years old. And the moment my mother handed my wedding money to my brother's girlfriend, she accidentally paid for the most satisfying wedding she never saw coming. I didn't cry when I found out. I didn't scream. I just stood in her kitchen, holding a cold cup of coffee, listening to her explain, with this breezy, unbothered tone, like she was talking about the weather, why the money my grandparents had set aside specifically for me no longer existed. Why it had quietly, casually, been redirected to a woman my brother had been dating for 11 months. She said it like it was obvious. Like I should have already understood. Dominic needs this more right now, Cassie. You know how he is. And Priya's family has expectations. I looked at her. I said, Mom. That money had my name on it. She smiled in that patient, tired way she always did when she thought I was being slow. It had the family's name on it. That was the sentence that changed everything. But to understand why that one sentence broke something permanently in me, you have to go back. You have to understand what that money actually meant, and what kind of family would look you in the eye and say your name and their name were the same thing. I grew up in a house in Raleigh, North Carolina, with parents who genuinely believed they were fair. That was the part that made it so hard to name for so long. They weren't cruel people. They didn't yell. They didn't hit. They paid the bills, kept the lights on, drove us to school in a reliable car, and told us both regularly that they loved us. But love and attention are not the same thing. And I learned that difference so early it became part of how I understood the world. My brother Dominic is 3 years older than me. He is one of those people who fills a room not because he is particularly brilliant or unusually kind, but because he is loud and confident and never seems to question whether he belongs somewhere. He laughs easily. He tells stories that grow larger every time he tells them. He has a way of making adults feel like they're in on a joke with him, and my parents, from the time he was about 9 years old, were utterly, helplessly enchanted by him. I was quieter. More careful. The kind of kid who reads instructions before touching something, who thinks before speaking, who notices when adults are upset before they've said a single word about it. My mother called this being sensitive, which in her vocabulary was not a compliment. My father called it overthinking, which was his gentle way of saying he didn't know what to do with me. The imbalance showed up in small ways at first. Dominic's sports schedules organized the family calendar. His games, his tournaments, his award nights. When I joined the school orchestra in 6th grade and had a winter concert, my parents came, but spent the drive home talking about how Dominic's basketball game the following Saturday was going to be a tough one for him. I remember sitting in the back seat still holding my violin case, still wearing the black dress we'd been told to wear, watching the streetlights slide past the window and thinking, that's it, then. That's how much that mattered. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I didn't need the attention the way Dominic did. And that was true, in a way. I learned early not to need it, which is a different thing entirely from not wanting it. The real trouble started in high school, when I began to be better than Dominic at things that were visible. I got higher grades. I won a regional writing competition when I was 16. I got into a better college than he did. None of these things were done to compete with him, I was just being myself, but my mother had a remarkable talent for reframing my achievements as threats to his comfort. When my acceptance letter came from UNC Chapel Hill, my mother's first response, standing right there at the kitchen counter, was, just don't rub it in with your brother. He's still figuring things out. Dominic had been accepted to a smaller school in state, nothing wrong with it, but she said it like my good news was something I'd done to him. Like I had reached into his future and taken something. I learned to announce good things quietly. I learned to frame my wins as nothing special. I learned to make myself smaller around Dominic so that my mother wouldn't look at me with that particular expression, not quite anger, not quite disappointment, something more like irritation, like I was a problem she hadn't budgeted for. But here's what I didn't know until I was much older, my grandmother had seen it too. My mother's mother, Grandma Ruth, was a practical woman who expressed love through organization and preparation. She didn't do big emotional speeches. She did things. She set things up. And when I was 16, she called me into the kitchen after a Sunday dinner and told me, very quietly, that she had started a fund. For your wedding, she said, folding a dish towel with the focused precision she gave everything. Not for your brothers. Not for anyone else's. Yours. Because you are going to build something good, Cassie, and I want you to have a head start. She told me she had spoken to my parents about it. That they had agreed to hold it and add to it over the years. That it would be there when I needed it. I didn't hug her. I wasn't a big hugger then. I just nodded and said thank you, and she patted my hand once and went back to folding the dish towel. But I held that information close for years. Not because I was obsessed with weddings or planning some elaborate dream event, but because of what it meant. It meant someone in my family had looked at me, specifically at me, and decided to protect something for my future. It meant I wasn't an afterthought. It meant the money had my name on it. I thought that meant it would still be there when I needed it. I was wrong. But I didn't know that yet. I moved to Charlotte after college for a job with a mid-sized architecture firm. I had studied design, and I was good at it, the kind of good that comes from caring more about the work than about being seen doing it. Within 4 years I had been promoted twice. I had a small apartment that I had furnished slowly and carefully, piece by piece, until it felt like a place that genuinely belonged to me. I had also met James. James Whitfield came into my life at a bad time, which is how good things sometimes arrive, when you're not looking and not prepared. He was a structural engineer who worked with my firm on a commercial project, and the first time we argued was in a conference room over a load-bearing wall I wanted to remove and he absolutely did not want me to remove. We were both right in different ways. The compromise we landed on was actually better than either of our original ideas. He asked me to dinner 2 weeks later. I said yes because he was direct and specific about it, not a vague, we should hang out, but an actual invitation, an actual place, an actual time. I have always respected directness. It was so rare in my family that I'd learned to treasure it wherever I found it. We dated for 2 years. He met my family at Christmas of the second year, which was its own kind of test, and he passed, not because he charmed them, but because he didn't try to. He was polite, he was present, he listened, and he didn't perform. My mother didn't know what to make of him. My father liked him immediately, which meant my mother eventually decided she liked him too. Dominic had been dating Priya for about 6 months at that point. She was beautiful and sharp and had very specific opinions about everything from wine to kitchen tile, and my mother was already half in love with her within the first hour of meeting her. I didn't begrudge Dominic the relationship. Priya seemed genuinely good for him, and he seemed genuinely happy. What I didn't know was that Priya had mentioned, in passing, at some dinner I wasn't at, that her family expected a certain kind of wedding. A big wedding. A wedding with a reception hall and a photographer with a waiting list and flowers that required a spreadsheet to organize. I didn't know my mother had already started calculating how to make that happen. I didn't know any of that when James proposed. He did it quietly, in my apartment, on a Tuesday evening in October, while we were cooking dinner. No grand gesture, no hidden cameras, no crowd of friends crammed into a restaurant. Just him, and me, and the pot of pasta going on the stove, and a ring he'd chosen himself without anyone's advice because he knew exactly what I would want. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. And then, because I was still the girl who believed in fairness, I called my mother. The conversation was short. She said all the right things. Congratulations, I'm so happy, we'll have to celebrate. She asked to see the ring at Christmas. She said she was proud of me. She did not mention the fund. I assumed she would when the time came. Christmas came. I showed her the ring. She cried a little, which surprised me, and held my hand for a moment in a way that felt genuine. We talked briefly about timing. James and I were thinking late the following year, something small and meaningful, not more than 60 people. And then, on the second day of the holiday visit, I asked. I didn't ask in front of everyone. I waited until my father had gone to his office and Dominic and Priya had gone to the store, and I asked my mother quietly at the kitchen table, "Mom, I just want to start planning. Can we talk about Grandma Ruth's fund?" She got up to refill her coffee. That was the first signal. She always moved when she didn't want to answer something directly. "We should probably talk about that," she said, with her back to me. "Okay," I said. She turned around, leaned against the counter, and held her coffee cup with both hands. And then she told me. Most of the fund was gone. Dominic and Priya were planning the wedding. Her family had expectations. There were deposits to put down. The venue needed 60% upfront. She said she was sure I understood. She said James and I were practical people who didn't need a big event anyway. She said it like it was a compliment. I sat very still. I asked how much was left. She named a number. It was 11% of what the fund had originally contained. I said, "Mom. That was Grandma Ruth's money." She set it aside specifically for me. She said, it had the family's name on it. And I put my coffee cup down very carefully on the table. I didn't throw it. I didn't raise my voice. I just set it down, and I looked at her, and I understood something I should have understood 15 years ago, standing in the back seat of a car holding a violin case while my parents talked about Dominic's basketball game. I had always been in the family. I had never quite been part of it. "Okay," I said. And I meant something entirely different by that word than she thought I did. I didn't tell James what had happened that night. We drove home on December 27th and I sat in the passenger seat watching the highway and thinking. I told him the next morning, at breakfast, without drama. I laid it out the way I would explain a flawed blueprint. Here are the facts, here is the problem, here is what it means structurally. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" I loved him so much in that second. Not for offering to fix it. Just for asking what I wanted. I thought about it for a full week before I decided. And what I decided was this: we were going to plan the most beautiful wedding I could imagine, and we were going to do it entirely without my family's money or my family's involvement in any decision that mattered. Not out of spite, I wasn't interested in revenge for its own sake. But because I had spent my entire life shrinking my goals to make room for Dominic's needs, and I was done. If I was building something, I was building it right. I sat down with James and our budget. We were both employed, both careful with money, and we had been saving for a house. We redirected a portion of those savings. We were creative. We were strategic. We called in favors from people in our professional world. I knew a caterer through a project, James knew a photographer through a colleague's wedding. We found a venue through a client of my firm, a converted farmhouse outside of Hillsborough that had never been featured in a wedding magazine and was more beautiful than anything I'd seen in one. We planned it in 4 months. 52 guests. A Saturday in September. String lights over a barn ceiling and a dinner that lasted 3 hours because nobody wanted it to end. I told my parents the date. I told them the location. I told them it would be lovely and they were welcome to come. What I did not tell them was that we had done everything ourselves. I didn't tell them because I didn't want to have a conversation about it before the day. I wanted the day to simply exist, fully realized, fully ours, and then let them see it. But that's not what happened first. In February, 4 months before our wedding, Dominic and Priya announced their engagement. I heard it at a family dinner I had driven 3 hours to attend. My mother brought out champagne. My father toasted Dominic like he was a man who had climbed Everest. Priya held out her ring, larger than mine, a fact I registered and then set aside because it genuinely did not matter to me, and everyone gathered around. My mother cried again. The same cry she'd given me. Maybe slightly bigger. What happened after dinner, in the kitchen, was what I hadn't prepared for. Priya found me washing dishes. I always migrated to useful tasks at family events, old habit, and she said, with the careful tone of someone who had been coached, "Cassie, I want you to know I didn't ask for the money. I want you to know that." I looked at her. "I know," I said. "This isn't about you." She nodded. Then she said, "Your mom talks about you, you know. More than you'd think." I kept washing the dish in my hands. "What does she say?" Priya paused. "She says you've always been the one who didn't need things. That you were always fine on your own." I set the dish in the drying rack. Always fine on your own. That was the story they'd been telling themselves. That my self-sufficiency was natural, temperamental, maybe even a preference, rather than something they had built into me by repeatedly demonstrating that asking for things led to disappointment. I didn't say that to Priya. She didn't deserve it, and she already knew more than was comfortable. I said, "I hope your wedding is everything you want it to be." And I meant it. But I also thought, watch what I build without you. The months between that dinner and our September wedding were the most productive of my professional life. I am not sure if that was coincidence or if I was running on something, some compressed fuel made of old hurt and redirected ambition. I submitted a project proposal that had been sitting on my desk for 6 weeks. I got the commission. I started a side collaboration with a landscape designer I'd admired for years. James and I put down a deposit on a house in the neighborhood we'd been circling for 2 years. I was not trying to prove anything to my family. I want to be clear about that, because the distinction matters. Spite is exhausting and it relies on the other person as an audience. I wasn't performing for them. I was just, finally, completely, without apology, building for myself. The week before the wedding, my mother called. She had heard, through some network of information I had never fully mapped, that the venue was quite nice. She wanted to know if she should bring anything. She asked if there would be a rehearsal dinner. I told her the rehearsal dinner was small, immediate family and the wedding party, 8 people total. She said of course, that made sense. She asked, very carefully, if I had everything I needed. I said yes. She paused. "We should have handled things differently, Cassie. With the fund." I let the pause sit for a moment. Then I said, "We don't have to talk about that before the wedding, Mom. I just want you to know." "I know," I said. "I'll see you Saturday." I hung up gently. Not angrily. I just didn't have space in that week for a conversation that would cost me energy I needed elsewhere. The morning of the wedding, I woke up early in the farmhouse's main bedroom, which the owner had made available to me and my bridesmaids. The light came through old wooden shutters in pale September strips. I could smell coffee from downstairs. My best friend, Nadia, who had been with me since college, who had listened to every version of the fun story and the family story and the whole long complicated architecture of my childhood, brought me a cup and sat on the edge of the bed and said nothing for a full 5 minutes. That was one of the things I loved best about her. Then she said, "You ready?" I said, "Yes." She said, "You know your mom cried at the rehearsal dinner." I had not gone to the rehearsal dinner. I had been at a dinner with James's family. This was not a pointed decision, the timing had simply worked out that way, but Nadia had attended, and I heard her tone. "Happy crying?" I asked. Nadia tilted her head. "Complicated crying. The kind where you can't tell if someone is proud or grieving something they didn't protect." I thought about that. I thought about my grandmother, who had died 2 years earlier without knowing her fund had been redirected. I thought about the dish towel she had folded, and the hand she had patted, and the very specific and deliberate thing she had tried to give me. I thought, I'm here. I made it here. Different than she imagined, but here. Let's get dressed, I said. The wedding was everything I had planned and then something more, the way an event becomes more than its components when the people inside it are genuinely happy to be there. James stood at the end of the aisle with the kind of expression that people practice and never quite achieve, complete presence, no performance, just being in the moment without trying to. I walked toward him on my own. We had talked about it and decided that was what I wanted. No one giving me away, because I had never belonged to anyone who deserved to hand me over. My parents sat in the second row. My mother had dressed beautifully. My father wore a tie I recognized from a photograph of their own wedding, and I felt something move in me at that, not forgiveness exactly, but the beginning of something softer. Dominic sat next to Priya and he was smiling, and it looked real. The ceremony was 22 minutes long. We had written our own vows, and James said something that made 3 people in the front row cry, and then I said something that made him cry, and I held his face in my hands for a moment before we kissed because I needed him to see that I was completely, entirely there. The dinner lasted 3 hours. Then the dancing lasted longer. James's father pulled me onto the dance floor to a song I didn't know and danced with such cheerful incompetence that I laughed until I couldn't breathe. Nadia gave a toast that was funny and honest and true. The caterer told me twice that she wanted to work with my firm again. At some point in the evening, my mother found me near the edge of the barn, where I had slipped away for 5 minutes of air. She stood next to me looking out at the string lights over the field and she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "This is beautiful, Cassie." "Thank you," I said. "Did you do all of this yourselves?" "We did." Another silence. "I didn't know," she said, and I understood she didn't mean the venue or the lights. She meant something larger. Something that would take longer to name. I looked at her, my mother, 61 years old, in a dress she had clearly chosen carefully, eyes bright with something caught between pride and a reckoning she wasn't sure she was ready for. I said, "I know you didn't." I wasn't trying to wound her. But I also wasn't going to smooth it over. Some things need to be acknowledged plainly before they can be set down. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Just once. Then she let go and walked back toward the lights and the music. I stood outside for another minute. The air smelled like grass in September. Somewhere across the field, James was laughing at something, and I could pick his laugh out of any crowd now, the way you can with people who have become part of the soundscape of your life. I thought about the girl who had learned to be self-sufficient not by choice but by training. I thought about the violin case and the back seat. I thought about the returned phone calls and the quiet redirections and the fund with my name on it being handed to someone else without a second thought. I thought, look where I am anyway. I wasn't fine because I didn't need things. I was fine because I had learned to build things. And those are different skills, grown from different soil. Dominic and Priya's wedding was 8 months later, in May. It was everything my mother had spent the fund on, the large hall, the imported flowers, the photographer with the wait list. It was genuinely beautiful. I danced at their reception and meant it. Priya pulled me aside near the end of the night and said, "Yours was better, you know." I smiled. "They were different," I said. She shook her head a little, just once. "No. Yours was better." I didn't argue. I just let her say it. 6 months after our wedding, Grandma Ruth's lawyer contacted my parents about a detail of her estate that had been held in review. I didn't know this was happening. I found out afterward, from my father, who called me on a Thursday evening and spoke in the careful voice he used when he was trying to say something difficult. Grandma Ruth had written a secondary clause into her will. Not the fund itself, that had been at my parents' discretion, but a separate, smaller account, held in trust, that had been structured to transfer directly to me upon my marriage certificate being filed. Not to my parents. Not to the family. To me. It wasn't a large amount. It wasn't the point. The point was that she had known. She had seen what I had seen, and she had built in a failsafe that bypassed every redirect. My father told me the amount. Then he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "She knew how to look out for you even when we didn't." I sat with the phone against my ear for a long time before I answered. "Yeah," I said. "She did." He said, "Cassie, I need you to know that we should have done better." I said, "I know." He said, "Are we going to be okay?" I thought about my mother's hand squeezing mine in the September air. I thought about the complicated crying Nadia had described. I thought about my father's wedding tie and the 4 hours he had danced at our reception. I thought about the things you can't take back and the things you can, slowly, carefully, begin to rebuild. "We're going to try," I said. "That's what I can offer right now." He said that was enough. I think he meant it. James and I moved into our house in November. We painted the kitchen ourselves over 2 weekends, and the color came out slightly darker than the swatch, and we decided we loved it anyway. On the shelf above the kitchen table I put one photograph, Nadia and me and James on the dance floor, all three of us mid-laugh, the string lights blurred behind us in the September dark. I think about my grandmother sometimes, folding that dish towel. The specific and practical love of someone who made sure you had something of your own before the world got to you. I think about what she would make of all of it. The redirected fund, the secondary account, the farmhouse in September, the fact that I walked toward my husband on my own feet with nobody handing me over. I think she would have nodded. Made a small satisfied sound. Maybe patted my hand once. And I think she would have been right. The wedding happened. Just not the way anyone planned. And it turned out that was exactly the version it was supposed to be.